Hello and welcome back to Vintage Super League. Good games, you big lug sack.
Yeah. My draws were very fortunate there. I don't think I played especially well, but my draws more than made up for that.
Yeah, last time we played, obviously we played in the first set. I was able to overcome some turn one lotuses, but my game one draw, it wasn't really going to happen. I mean, if you didn't have two swords to plowshares, maybe, but even then I was probably going to lose. And game two, coming back from down 10 cards, I tried to put you in spots that might be tough because, you haven't played the format as much. But, I knew your hand. I knew you had Flusterstorm Snap. There wasn't really much. It was very unlikely that you didn't need to really have a lot of vintage experience to kind of not let yourself get set up for anything bad to ever happen. And so I could never really mount much of an offense. So tried my best, but you play well, you drew well, got me pretty good on that one.
Yeah, it's about all there was to it. What made you decide to play Mentor this time around? Because I remember last time we played, you were on workshops.
Yeah, so I rolled the die and determined how many dailies to go back and roll the die for which deck I was going to play. And then I ended up being Blue-White Mentor, which was almost the exact, 3 cards off of the deck that you sent me that you wanted to borrow for the, what's it called, the big vintage premiere event. So Oliver,
challenge.
We're both watching Owen stream, and I offer Owen a vintage deck to play the vintage daily and stream it. And Oliver's like, I'm in, I'll take it. And sends me a list for Blue-White Mentor that he wanted to play, and he ended up deciding not to play it, but it turned out that the deck that I randomly decided to play was 3 cards off of that. So I ended up adding a Library of Alexandria and changed a couple cards on the sideboard to try to have a little bit better matchup because, there's a good 99 to 100% chance that Oliver was going to play Mentor. So try to be a little bit prepared for that, maybe have some good cards for Eldrazi, especially after Paul did well with it last week. And so I had 3 Pat decks on my sideboard and had the library in the main deck, but other than that, we were probably playing a 71, 72 card mirror.
Right. Yeah, I just played what I always play. I just enjoyed the deck a lot, so I didn't really see a reason to change.
If I was 100% sure you were playing the exact 75 cards in Blue-White Mentor, there's not all that much that I do to be able to combat that, especially if I still want to try to beat the 2 other people that I'm going to play against. Plus, you're not a lock to play it. Plus, what are you really going to do to beat that deck? That deck's just great. So, part of the reason why I was happy to play it myself. And so, you end up playing a mirror match, and it comes down to hoping that your opponent makes some mistakes, and if they don't, you're going to need to get lucky. And my draws were fine. They were actually pretty good, but not quite good enough this time. Our next match is going to be Chris Pikula against Bob Maher. I'll ask you what you think they're going to play, even though you've probably never heard of either of them except for giving Chris Pikula beats on Twitter.
Sure. I have no clue, honestly. I did not put them on any specific deck. I didn't change my deck in anticipation of any specific metagame. So, I don't know. Do you expect them to be on anything in particular?
No. I was actually surprised that Pikula wasn't on some kind of Shops deck, or some kind of Thorn deck, I guess I should say, White Eldrazi, in that same realm. He was kind of... When Vintage Super League started, I don't know if you ever watched the early seasons, or probably not. You were not old enough to use a computer yet when we were actually playing them, but nobody ever came with anything but blue decks for a while. There was a Dredge once in a blue moon, of the 10 players playing 9 different weeks, someone would play Dredge exactly once, but no one really played Shops. And then Chris started bringing Terra Nova Shops at the time, which was basically just workshops, only a cut Black Lotus for some reason. And then other people started to filter in Shops. Bob's actually played some Shops too. So I did want to make sure that I had at least enough sideboard cards so that I could bring in, things that were going to be pretty optimal for that potential deck. That deck is tough. And, the Blue-White Mentor deck, the thing is it doesn't want to sideboard out very many things against kind of anything except for Shops and maybe Dredge too, because, where are you really going to board out your card drawing, your counter spells, your mentors, you're keeping all those cards, and so it's just, is Flusterstorm good, is Mental Misstep good, and the matchups where they're bad, having enough cards to bring in is important. So I just made sure I had those matchups under control in case they brought them. Neither of them has played Dredge before, but it's definitely a possibility. Rodrigo, of course, did well with it last week. Bob's gotten his deck from Rodrigo a number of times, so it wouldn't be out of the question for Bob to play a Dredge deck, although he kind of likes to play off the beaten path decks. He's played Crucible, Zoranor, Fastbond, Infinite Mana decks before. He's played a lot of interesting, cool stuff, so his range definitely wide open. Chris, Well, I mean, as you noted on Twitter, we don't know what deck he's going to play, but we know he's not going to play it especially well. And so you just kind of go with that, and then you just hope that playing a consistent mentor deck that you'll be able to get the job done against anything he brings. That's kind of the game plan.
Yeah, that's basically my thought process.
I'm obviously
nailed it right on the head.
But all right, do we have? I guess we don't have any deck list slides yet because we don't know what they're playing yet. So I guess we are just basically waiting for them to get set up. They're both here, right? Hopefully. At the very least.
I assume so.
All right. So, how's school?
It's going pretty well, I'd say. No.
Do you have to?
I'm on break right now, so.
Do you have to report back every test you get back to Chris and John? Make sure that they know how the scholarship money is going.
Yeah, I don't know how happy they'll be, but.
That's good. Well. You want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? Do you watch the Magic Online Championship?
I did. I was very impressed with the play of the competitors and thought that there were a lot of good matchups, good commentary. I enjoyed the whole thing, basically.
Yeah. No, I mean, being able to utilize commentary in the same role that we actually do it here is definitely kind of nice. They got to bring in a new mix. I thought that. Obviously Chris did commentary there. David Williams did commentary, some VSL competitors. But, Marshall and Patrick Sullivan, I felt like really stole the show to me. I thought that was one of the best boosts I've ever heard. And so there was a lot of good stuff there, of course. Being able to watch a tournament on Magic Online. People had some mixed opinions on just watching Magic Online. But, of course, I think the people who watch VSL are going to be much higher on that. Like, I think watching Magic Online is a lot easier in a lot of ways to follow than something like real life Magic. Like you see things go on the stack, you're never confused about whose turn it is. It says it right there. You know what we're waiting on. You know what phase we're in. You know exactly what's going on, what's on the stack, whether things are timed correctly. It's not like someone says combat and then all of a sudden they can't crew and we have a 15-minute judge call. So there's a lot of good things about being on Magic Online that I personally really like, and I guess it kind of depends on who you are, how you feel about that. But I thought it was just a great event, and I love the commentary. Again, a lot of great people there. I mean, Reed Duke, who we've seen in all the VSL play-in tournaments, a great vintage player, and of course a Platinum Pro for many years himself, a former Magic Online champion. It's just a really cool event. So, that was here. And now we're on to Vintage. The Magic Online Championship, actually, a couple of years ago, me and Randy were in the booth. They actually made the competitors play Vintage, which was really cool. Wish that that we got to see a little bit more of the other formats. I mean, Standard, I think the games are fun in general. Like, they're interesting. There's interaction. But the decks are, there aren't decks. It's just, these are the decks. You show up, you play them. You do whatever you can to try to win with your Mardu deck or your Saheeli deck, and then it's kind of it. And so being able to see some more diversity and playing some other formats is definitely kind of cool. So.
Yeah, when I played the Magic Online Championship last year, they made us play Legacy and Modern, which ultimately ended up being my downfall in that tournament. But it was definitely an interesting experience testing for and metagaming for with all the different formats. It kind of mirrored the Magic World Championship with multi-format, small tournament structure.
Except at that point, you just kind of have to pick and choose your format. I mean, did you actually prepare hard for all of the formats when you played in Worlds last year? It's really hard. Like, you just kind of have to figure out where you're going to pick and choose. And of course, professional players, you've tested for the Pro Tour, so if you had to choose a format, you would probably neglect some Standard, try to get an edge somewhere else because you've actually played the format. But man, trying to prepare for even 3 formats is incredibly challenging. I think that's something that a lot of people were like, oh, I wish there was a bunch more formats. There's so much more I want to see. But man, that is asking the competitors to do so much. It's just a ton of work, and you want to play at the highest level. You don't want to, they're playing for $25,000 and slots to Worlds and slots to the Magic Online Championship next year and Platinum. It's like so much stuff, and to try to prepare for 4 formats is just like, it's overwhelming. I mean, for anyone. So it sounds like Chris and Bob are ready to go. So let's take you down to the match. And the big reveal, here it is. Round 2 of Vintage Super League Middle Group. Bob Maher back on Paradoxical Storm, and Chris Pikula on at least some variant of Mentor. He's got a Pyroblast in his opening hand, so we know at least he's at least Jeskai. Maybe he has a 4th color for something like Sylvan Library, like Rachel's been playing. They both did not have keepable opening hands. Chris, of course, with no lands in his hand. This hand looks much better for Chris. Bob won the die roll. He's got turn 1, kind of a ton.
Bob's hand looks excellent here.
Well, Tendrils on top. That'll go to the bottom.
Yeah, considering Chris does not have Force well, this is going to be rough for him.
You can actually play turn 1 Paradoxical for 3, right? Like that Mana Crypt will make 2 mana. The Soul Ring gets him to 3. The Mox Opal to 4 if you wanted to, or you can just Ancestral, try to see what he finds. Yeah, Ancestral play looks really appealing if he knew he had a good card on top from that Scry, but of course he doesn't. So I think he'll still Ancestral here, especially after the Soul Ring doesn't get misstepped. Try to find more artifacts, cast Paradoxical Outcome next turn, unless he just finds it all right now.
Yeah, I definitely like just using Ancestral here. But it looks like he's going for the Outcome.
This is interesting because this does make sure that he gets 2 Ancestrals on this turn kind of no matter what.
That's true.
And he has Merchant Scroll so that he can actually go find another Paradoxical. So this is interesting. I'm not sure what the right play is. I'm definitely interested on what the chat has to say about this. I haven't played this deck before, but it felt like both plays were really close. I think I like the Outcome play thinking about it right now. And of course, watching a Hall of Fame player who's actually played this deck choose to make that decision makes it seem a little bit clearer that's probably the right play, but it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I actually like the play here, considering that he does not know what deck Chris is playing. So I kind of like going for the turn 1 potential win in case Chris is on some kind of unfair deck of his own, like another Storm deck or whatnot.
Well, the Ancestral is likely to turn up something where he can still cast the Outcome. Like, all he needs is a land.
That's true. Yeah,
so,
that's fair.
Or,
that's fair.
Another Mox Opal, a Mox Sapphire, Black Lotus. There's plenty of things that allow him to actually cast that Outcome anyway, but, making sure that you can cast the Outcome, you're going to be able to cast the Ancestral afterwards. So this definitely makes a lot more sense after, once I actually try to think about it and process it. Now he definitely has some interesting decisions. I'm not sure I love playing that Mana Crypt first. He could have played Soul Ring off the Mox and still have that Opal on and potentially save some damage off the Mana Crypt. But he's probably going to put it out there no matter what, just because there's a chance Chris is on chops and he's at 20 life. I'm not entirely sure whether you need to preserve any life with this type of deck. But hopefully get another Outcome.
Seems like taking an extra flip there is less likely to be relevant than potentially it being stranded in his hand. Like you were saying, if Chris is playing Workshops or some kind of similar deck.
Yeah, it can't be stranded in his hand because he's going to have 5 mana plus another.
True.
Wow. That could have been a huge draw if Bob didn't have Force of Will. Chris just drew Stony Silence off the top.
Yeah, that was a very good draw on his end, but unfortunately
you have 2 Stony Silence in your main deck?
I only have 1 in my main deck.
And 2 more in the sideboard. Yeah, I've got 2 in the main deck and 1 on the sideboard, so Bob's going to be facing a lot of Stony Silences this week.
Yeah, for sure.
Got 3 opponents on Stony Mentor.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing Bob chose this deck expecting this type of metagame with a lot of Stony Mentor decks. So I assume he has some plans for the Stony Silences that he expects to face.
Bob will let the time lock resolve. So Chris is looking for
just being an explorer here.
Well, kind of, but
free explorer.
Like if he has Flusterstorms or Pyroblast in his, we know he has Pyroblast. We don't know if he has Flusterstorm, but he actually has a number of 1-mana counters that could have forced this Stony Silence potentially through. Now Flusterstorm, I assume that Bob would have the mana to be able to actually pay for, but a card like Pyroblast, he could have countered the Force of Will, got the Stony Silence in play, and all of a sudden Bob's hand is just doing stone nothing. Yeah, he's just basically never going to cast that Outcome. He would have to draw a Tolarian Academy, in which case, I guess he has Vampiric Tutor, so he could tutor for Academy, untap, cast it, draw 4, replay a bunch of artifacts. It's still just tough to get enough mana to actually win, but he would certainly still be in the game, even against the Stony Silence. Yeah,
this Storm deck has a really tough time operating through a through a Stony Silence, because unlike other Storm decks, all their fast mana is artifact based. So it's really hard for them to storm off without having access to that fast mana.
Yeah, I mean, Tolarian Academy is a real game changer, and he has a tutor in his hand, but you do still need to get black mana. Not necessarily. I guess he doesn't even necessarily have to get black mana because he could get enough artifacts with enough outcomes to be able to just Mind's Desire, and at that point he's probably just going to win. And I assume he's got other ways to produce enough, colored mana. I mean, you're generally going to use your Mox Opals and other things to produce the black, but probably not necessary. So I actually think there's a reasonable chance Bob could win this game through a Stony Silence. Now, it's going to be a lot easier to deal with winning the game without that Stony Silence in play, though.
Right. I imagine with an outcome in his hand, a tutor on the stack, and Chris having no way to interact, that we're going to see Bob win this game this turn.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get to draw 4 cards. He doesn't have any action besides that. I guess it depends on what he gets.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, what do you think he's going to get?
I have no clue. I don't even know what cards are.
He could get like a Yawgmoth's Will.
Yawgwill seems pretty good. Yeah. Or another outcome. Another outcome's just like a 0 mana draw 4 at this point. It even nets in mana, actually.
Yawgmoth's Will is 2 outcomes and an Ancestral in the graveyard, so at that point you're just worried about mana. Mind's Desire is probably a good one.
Yeah, Mind's Desire seems very good. It's going to look at a lot of extra cards for him. All of these options seem great.
I mean, here's what's going to happen. Bob is going to go off. He's going to draw 10 cards. He's going to play all his artifacts. He's going to play his Lion's Eye Diamond. He's going to discard his hand. Chris is going to play a Mentor, and then we're going to see what happens.
Yeah. There's always that option.
Well, he's got the defense grid now too.
Yeah.
That'll be a little bit better for after he accidentally Lion's Eye Diamonds his hand away.
Jeez, all the daggers.
I don't know if they're daggers. I'm just explaining his usual, pattern of play.
Yeah.
I didn't make you do that. That was his choice.
It's true. What is the likelihood that he misses on this Mind's Desire?
It's a Mind's Desire for 10.
Yeah.
11. I guess he's going to cast the Time Walk first. So he's going to get an extra turn, plus he's going to have 10 cards in play.
Oh, yeah, he could do it for 11, yeah. I was thinking he didn't have enough blue mana, but he hasn't made his land drop yet.
Yeah, plus he had the blue floating with the 2 Moxes. His odds of missing are pretty close to 0. I don't know how many lands are in his deck. I think he could probably hit 10 of them. He could hit enough artifacts that, obviously he could miss. It's not 0. It's slim. He probably has. I guess it depends on what you consider action. Like Gitaxian Probe is not really much of action.
Yeah, could draw into something though. Oh, he had a Yawgwill, so that's probably game.
Yeah, probably. There's some chance. He also could have cracked his fetch land first to make it even less likely that he would fizzle.
Yeah, sure.
Really greedy play right here. Can we, open his exile? They'll show us what he hit off the Mind's Desire more clearly. Oh, look, it's a bunch of blue cards. 2 of them are Force of Will, I guess.
Yeah,
he did hit Yawgwill. He hit Lion's Eye Diamond, which at this point is completely fine to hit. So he can just play all the artifacts, can discard to Lion's Eye Diamond, doesn't matter. He can Yawgwill, recast Mind's Desire for his entire deck. I think it'll be really close. Can probably do it for 25-ish.
Yeah, seems like that's the game, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, I'm not sure he could easily misclick his way out of this. It is possible, but...
Yeah, even if he discards his whole hand, it doesn't even matter because he has a Yawgwill.
Yeah, he would have to Yawgwill now. No, there's nothing. I can't even come up with. He can also just have 5 Time Walks floating, but whatever. Yeah. Chris will not try to play to his collection of misclick outs, and we'll sweep up the game. So Chris going right to Mindbreak Trap. First thing that happens. It's a good one.
Yep. 0 mana counter spell. So yeah, Chris just on a Jeskai Mentor list. Some Dak Fade in. It seems like he has a bunch of Power Blast, so he was probably expecting us to also play Mentor decks. She was right.
Yeah.
So do you think these Jeskai Mentor decks are favored in the Mentor matchup? The Mentor Mirror matchup?
I don't. Dak Vaden is certainly fine. I mean, any Planeswalker is fine. I don't think it's good. It's not like a card I'm excited about. It's a 3-mana Planeswalker that doesn't actually provide you card advantage or provide you card selection, but it can be attacked. So I don't love it. Pyroblast is a card that, you know, everyone loves in the blue matchup, but I actually don't love it against blue-white Mentor. Like, if you have it, you're going to play it, but it requires red mana, which you don't necessarily want to have red mana in play. Like, that is kind of a liability. You are playing less white sources, and, you know, these decks do play, you know, Strip Mine and usually a couple Wastelands. So that's not a 0 cost. And, you know, leaving up red mana is not a given either. You know, a lot of the counter spells that we're playing, of course, are Force of Wills and Mental Missteps, which are free, and it doesn't do anything against Flusterstorm. So you're not necessarily trading up for huge advantage. Like, Force of Will is already not a great card in the matchup. It's kind of a necessary evil, but, you know, it's not really the matchup where you want to 2-for-1 yourself. And, you know, every other card you're countering, like, you can counter a Gush, but that's not really that exciting. Like, returning the land is not a huge cost. It is a free spell. If you counter a Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, that's great. But, you know, a lot of the Mentor decks, like, you're not playing any Jace the Mind Sculptor main. I think you have one on the sideboard. I'm not playing any. Neither of us are playing Dak Vaden. So, like, Pyroblast is not a super exciting card. It's a fine card. So, adding another color for Dak Vaden and Pyroblast just doesn't seem even close to worth it if that's the matchup you're gunning for. Now, Dak Vaden's a really good card against, of course, artifact decks, but, you know, unless you're talking about like a Paul Rietzl artifact deck or maybe an outcome deck, Pyroblast is going to be bad in those matchups. Like against Shops, you know, he's playing a bunch of main deck Pyroblast. That's a big negative. Where Dak Vaden is obviously a good card. So I don't think you're getting a whole lot by adding the red in general. I mean, it really just depends on the metagame you expect, but the one we're talking about, no, I would not play it.
Yeah, and the shop stacks tend to have a lot of wastelands and whatnot, and forcing yourself to play red mana in your deck is going to make you weaker to that.
You know, Randy points out in the chat that Sudden Shock is the reason to play red, which I agree with. That is why I have splashed red in the past, but Chris isn't playing Sudden Shock, so...
okay.
Yeah. Red was good for a while because Lightning Bolt was a good card, but then, you know, blue-white just became so much better once people started playing cards like Thought-Knot Seer, playing, you know, Shops, where Bolt might not be good enough to kill their creature anyway. So both players have Black Lotus in their opening hand. You can tell us a little bit about that. As the kid who always has Black Lotus in his opening hand.
Basically. Although Bob's hand is quite bad, despite the Black Lotus. It can make a lot of mana, but doesn't really get anywhere.
I've never had Black Lotus in my opening hand, so I would keep it with 6 other cards that did nothing. I would keep 4 Gristlebrand's, 2 Emrakuls, and a Lotus, just to say that I had an opening hand Black Lotus. It sounds really cool. But again, I don't have the experience. That's why I tried to turn to your expertise.
Yeah, fair enough. It is a good card. I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah.
I've had some good times with it.
Although so sweet.
Yeah, it looks like Bob's hand's a lot better this time around. And
well, Chris actually mulliganed his hand, but he still has opening hand Black Lotus.
Yeah,
so it's all good.
It's very lucky. And even has Pyroblast to hold up. Yeah, Chris's hand seems really good, but it doesn't really line up that well. Yeah, it doesn't really line up that well against Bob's hand, though, because Bob has turn 1 Wheel of Fortune.
He does, but I mean, Chris already has a Mentor in play. He had turn 1 Lotus.
Yeah, so that's true.
That is true, but giving Chris 7 new cards when he has a land drop and he has a Mentor in play, this isn't like the same huge advantage. Like, normally, you mulligan to 6, and you get to cast Wheel of Fortune after putting 4 things in play. You've just, 7 for 1, essentially. But you're giving Chris 4 new cards, and he already has a land and Mentor in play. So it's like, yeah, it's what your deck's, what you're trying to do. It's what your deck's designed to do. It's really good, but, this has got a reasonable chance against it.
Yeah, I just don't think Bob really has much of an option at this point. His hand just kind of forces him to just go for it.
Well, what he could... No. So he could not imprint Chrome Mox. He could try to chain the Mentor.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
I mean... I wonder what Pikula would do. I wonder if he would just Pyroblast that. That would also just give him a token and make the Wheel of Fortune even worse.
Yeah, I imagine he would Pyroblast it. It's just,
once it goes back to its hand, it's basically the same thing as it dying. Like he just has.
Oh yeah,
just have minutes to make
you're
mana
completely right. I was completely forgetting about Chris's hand having no mana and nothing to do. So he would definitely Pyroblast it. Just literally not thinking. So if Bob was clairvoyant, he would definitely want to be imprinting that chain on the Chrome Mox.
Yeah. But I was imagining that he would just go for the Chain of Vapor here. He doesn't have the same information as us, and it seems like the right play, but it's not going to work out that well for him.
Yeah, I agree. Especially because you don't really care if it gets misstepped or something.
Yeah. So he's probably going to go for the turn 1 wheel, but if he's not able to do anything big this turn, then it could end up very poorly for him. A very risky play, but it's one he has to make, like we were saying.
Yeah, I don't really think there's any risk involved here just because he literally has nothing else. So it's just, I mean, this is basically how I felt with a couple of the plays I made against you, is that, well, this play is not a winning play. It's not great. Like casting this Wheel of Fortune here, you don't feel like, okay, I'm going to win this game. It's like, well, if I don't do this, I'm just completely dead anyway, so let's see what happens.
All right. Yeah,
now,
this
Chris
went
already has a
for
bunch
Bob.
of free counter spells. He's got, the missteps. He's got the Force Wilson. He also boarded in multiple Mind Break traps. Yeah, Chris pretty well.
Oh wow!
His new hand is a lot better than his one Pyroblast hand.
Yeah, this worked out a lot better for Chris. I'll say that much. Is he going to be able to kill Bob this turn? No, I guess not. But
if he finds
very
time
close.
walk.
Yeah. Or fast mana.
I don't think you can necessarily kill him off fast mana. He'd have to cast 8 spells this turn. This is 1. So starting out 8 is pretty tough.
Fair enough. He could get himself in a very, very good position, though.
He is going to be in a very good position no matter what. I'll give you that.
Yeah. So if you're Chris, what are you scared of here?
I mean, nothing. He just probed. He knows exactly what's up.
That's true.
He could. This game, Bob's hand's good. Like he's gonna lead on probe. Chris could mess up if he wants. It's not really a huge game changer because Bob has a Flusterstorm and he has Paradoxical Outcome. So it's not really like Chris can stop that. Like he doesn't have Mind Break Trap. He doesn't have Flusterstorm. So I think Bob's kind of in great shape to be able to win the game, even despite all of this. I could be wrong. I could easily be missing something, but
no, I think you're right. I mean, Chris is probably going to ponder.
That's a really good hand.
Yeah, we'll see.
If he doesn't find like a Mind Break Trap, this Tendrils alone, like if Paradoxical Outcome resolves, Tendrils is just lethal, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean he does have double black just with Voltaic Key, Mana Crypt, Mox Opal. So he doesn't even have to find that.
Yeah. This actually looks less good for Chris than I initially thought.
Yeah, I mean, he found a great hand. It's just, so did Bob. I mean,
yeah,
it kind of is what it is. He has Force Will, he has Misstep, so, yeah, that just doesn't do it. So now Chris knows exactly who he's up against. I guess he's just going to ponder and try to find. There are definitely lots of combinations you can find, and although I guess like because he didn't play Foliage Strand first, if he wanted to find like all of the cards off Ponder or similar, he can't really do that because he'd have to shuffle, unless unless he found like Island and then Mox Time Walk, so that he could play the Island first. But let's say he found Mox Time Walk, he can't actually get there. The second Force of Will, that should potentially do it.
Yeah.
Bob's
going to have to draw something. Yeah, he's a couple of looks, but he has a lot of air in his deck, so it's definitely unfavored to hit something.
Yeah, just anything that searches for an artifact or just is a Time Vault. I guess it's not a locked win because he has Mana Crypt in play unless he's able to resolve a Tinker. Now, the other potential thing that can happen here is that if he casts Probe Out come Flusterstorm, and Chris cast 2 Force of Wills. We're already getting pretty close to that Tendril as being lethal. Now, I mean, it's still a little bit of a ways off, but yeah, oh, there's the Time Walk. Guess he doesn't have any mana.
Yeah, not quite there in Time Walk. And it's just basically a blue card in this hand. I mean, Bob is just going to be dead if Chris gets to take another turn, so...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's interesting, though. Bob's only at 10 life, so... I don't know, even if he finds and is able to resolve a Time Vault here, it's not guaranteed that he's going to be able to win the game. It's always an interesting dynamic with these kind of decks.
Oh, Chris just deciding what to discard. We'll see if Bob's able to get there. That second Force of Will was a pretty big draw. Bob needs some kind of counter, maybe a Time Vault.
Ooh, defense grid. That was a good one. Holy crap.
Well, we're a family show, so holy crud, but
holy
it was
crud.
good.
My bad. Yeah.
There are somehow people even younger than you who watch the show. No, I'm just kidding. There's no one younger than you up this list.
Fair.
Not on a school night. Come on. All right, so Bob should have this. He cast Defense Grid. Chris has to Force. Bob can Flusterstorm that if he wants to. Chris can Force again. And that's just outcome.
Yeah, assuming that this outcome doesn't or yields anything, then Bob should win this game. And I imagine it will, considering how many looks he's getting.
Is Chris going to misstep?
Since Chris already saw his hand, I imagine you misstep this. Just try to limit the number of draws he gets. With a hand like Chris, you just want to trade 1-for-1 wherever possible. Like, normally I don't like misstepping Gitaxian Probe, just in general, but in this specific situation.
The thing to consider there is if you cast Misstep, not only does it add an additional one to the Storm for the Tendrils you know about, but also you lose 2 life, so it's kind of like 2 Storm. So at that point, he only has to get to, 5 more spells. And you know you're going to force at least one of them, so that's 2 spells. So if he did draw another card drawing spell, or potentially, let's say he drew a Preordain, which is going to be a lot better defining action that you want to misstep. It actually is, I think, a pretty tough decision.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I didn't consider that.
There are just so many good ones in Bob's deck that you would prefer to misstep over that one. But again, you know Bob's hand, so if he missed on that one draw step, if you cast that misstep, you win the game. So I think that is a pretty interesting spot.
Yeah, that's true, but if you're planning on... I mean, I guess he doesn't necessarily draw into anything that you're going to be able to misstep, but... Yeah, I don't know, it's close. But if your argument is that there's better stuff to misstep, then the same logic still applies, where it's still going to add to the Storm and whatnot.
No, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I'm saying that there's a lot of interesting things to consider where, in a lot of ways you're like, okay, well, this is his one turn. I'll counter this thing. I can draw one card, except it has this downside, it has that downside. So it's actually kind of an interesting decision. I mean, it might just still clearly be correct to misstep it. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, like you're saying, it's very close either way. But yeah, Chris is just gushing here, trying to find some action. Needs to find a Mind Break Trap or another Force of Will.
Well, this is actually a great play by Bob. He's untapping his Mana Crypt, and his plan is to cast a Paradoxical Outcome with the Force of Will and Defense Grid still on the stack. That way, if he gets forced again, his Flusterstorm can counter both cards.
Yeah, that's a very good point. A lot of neat tricks you could do with Flusterstorm.
Yeah, so Chris kind of recognizes what's going to happen. He knows Bob's hand has he doesn't know about the Force of Will, but he knows the other 4 cards. So he's going to respond with Gus and try to hit, I guess, another Force of Will or a Mind Break Trap. Mindbreak Trap here could potentially get all the spells, including the Flusterstorms, and really change things around. Alright, so this is going to put a 4th spell on the stack. And Chris now paid a life for the Force of Will. So if Chris casts... So Bob's going to cast Outcome. He's going to cast Flusterstorm. And when Chris casts Force of Will, the thing is he needs one of these spells to resolve, or he actually doesn't have enough mana to cast the Tendrils. But the Tendrils are already looking like it's going to be lethal.
Yeah, for sure. It's not very often they just see a natural Tendril, so to speak, be good enough, but with all the counter spells that Chris is counting, it's adding to the storm count and could definitely happen here.
Yeah, so he's going to try to Flusterstorm the Force of Will and the Gush. Chris is going to need to find... Like, he can't cast anything else. These are just going to be countered. Assuming that Bob puts multiple copies on each spell. That means Defense Grid's going to resolve. It's also the 5th spell. So Paradoxical Outcome will be the 6th spell, and that just ends the game with the Tendrils. When the Defense Grid resolves, the game ends. So, Alright, so Chris can still cast his Force of Will on the original Defense Grid, though.
Yeah.
But Bob's going to get to untap his Mana Crypt with Voltaic Key. That's somewhere in the middle of this stack. And at that point have enough mana to cast a Paradoxical Outcome. Chris does not have a 3rd Force of Will or Mindbreak Trap.
Right, yeah. It looks like this is going to work out very well for Bob, assuming that he's able to get anywhere with all of his spells, which he's a huge favorite to do.
Yeah, he doesn't even need to resolve the outcome. Like, when this Flusterstorm resolves, it should counter the Gush and the Force of Will. If Chris goes, he basically has to Force of Will the Defense Grid. Force of Will doesn't do anything if he doesn't. And at that point, that's spell number 6. So Bob could just pitch his outcome to his own Force of Will as spell number 7, and the Tendrils is a lethal 8th spell there. So he kind of has his pick of the litter of how to actually win this game. But he is going to do so, assuming no crazy misclick.
Yeah, it seems like just going for the Tendrils gets you the most style points out of all the options, so I'd probably just elect to go for that.
Chris now needing to check to make sure there's multiple copies of Flusterstorm on these spells, or else he could potentially Flusterstorm or Force of Will one of the copies. Or he actually still has a Mental Misstep, so that is another way to potentially counter a copy. Now the Mental Misstep will make the Tendrils just lethal with no other spells cast, though. So Chris now knows that this outcome is going to resolve. I mean, assuming Bob didn't even draw a Force of Will, if he just drew a complete blank, Chris knows the hand besides the Force of Will, so this is not going to go well for him.
Yeah.
He has to force and hope that Bob, for whatever reason, doesn't cast Paradoxical Outcome.
Wow.
There is a universe where Bob... No, I guess not. Like, I would say that you can kind of play it safe here by just casting the Tendrils in a way, and then you'll still have the outcome and Force of Will next turn. But not against a Mentor and 100 Monks. I think there's a universe or a game state where that is a consideration against no lands, if your opponent doesn't have a ton of creatures out, where you maybe don't want to risk the outcome and you have this huge storm count that you just want to cast the Tendrils. This certainly isn't that game, but...
Right. Good thing to think about.
So the Tendrils is not quite lethal. Needs one more spell, but the outcome will get him there.
I mean, you could just Force of Will something, right?
He could Force of Will this Force. I don't really see how that could be better than casting the outcome, because you're assuming your Force is going to resolve. I guess it's better against... I guess it's better against Force. I was thinking Mindbreak Trap, where it doesn't matter. You're going to get all your copies exiled anyway. But yeah, if Chris does have another force, the tendrils would still resolve. So he is just going to make sure that this happens. Of course, defense grid resolving, make sure that there's nothing he can do anyway. And he's got the tendrils.
Yeah. Looks like he's just going to go for the force play. I mean, either one works. It's just whatever you're feeling at the given time.
I mean, playing the force is clearly correct. I'm just, kind of getting blinded by having the perfect information and knowing that Chris brought in Mindbreak Trap. So I'm just like, well, if he brings in, if he casts Mindbreak Trap, it doesn't matter either way. Like, you're just getting got.
Yeah.
If your Paradoxical gets countered. But that is not correct. He is playing around Force of Will, which is certainly the correct play. And Bob will advance to 1-0. Chris joins me in the 0-1 bracket. And so, yeah, you and Bob have a pretty nice position on the pack for trying to get that last, or not that last, but another playoff spot. Join a bunch of people who now have 3 wins, who have already locked up the wild card. And let's see, what's the next match? So you're up next against Chris Pikula. You never lose the mirror, so that's good for you.
Yeah, and, try not to.
So I'm going to give you 15 seconds right now to talk some trash about Chris, and then we'll cut to commercials. It's your stage.
Chris is
Don't let me down.
Interesting. I don't know. I can't do it on family-friendly programming.
Yeah, Chris is lit. I'll give you that.
Yeah, lit AF, yo.
All right, so Oliver is going to hop down to wherever you virtually play Magic Online. He'll be paired against Chris Pikula, and yeah, we'll have the rest of the round robin to go. After that, I'm going to play against Bob, and then we'll all play our last round opponents to close it out. We've got a lot of blue-white mentor going on, and Bob's already shown that Paradoxical Outcome can beat even Game 1 main deck Stony Silence. So should be an interesting night. Stay tuned for more Vintage Super League.